welcome to another episode of CrossTalk, 6th Plymouth District edition. My name is Kevin Tocci, and we are here to have a conversation. This show is more dedicated towards elected officials, state elected officials. For the longest time, it was a previously elected official for the 6th Plymouth District. We are actually our second show with Ken Sweezey, who is the state representative.
Thank you for having me, Kevin.
Welcome back. Well, this is your show. So.
Yeah, thanks.
Last time we talked, you're just kind of settling into the State House. We kind of got an idea as to how you were getting acclimated. A lot more meat on the bone this time around as we get ready to talk. How have things, here we are, I think like 5 months in, how are things for you up at the State House now?
Yeah, things are going great. Like you said, session is now definitely in full swing. We've gotten through the House version of the budget. We've had a few, more than a few above average supplemental budgets to work through. All my committees have met now and getting through the hearing process. So it's been good.
I think probably the first thing I want to start off with, and I think I did this with a neighboring state representative, Allison Sullivan Almeida. You two were a small group that actually voted against the House proposal for the fiscal 2026 budget. What prompted a no for you, and what were the biggest concerns in regards to the spending plan for the new fiscal year?
Yeah, so in regards to the budget, so for those that don't know, the budget this year was nearly $62 billion. Yeah. For reference, in 2019, the budget was only $42 billion. That's nearly a 50% increase in just 6 years. Yeah. So, you know, there are people that had problems with individual line items or programs, and in any budget, honestly, you're going to find plenty of programs that you agree with, plenty of programs you disagree with, and you're kind of coming to a compromise, which is totally understandable. And sometimes that's why people might vote no, is, oh, you know what, there's just too many programs or line items that I don't agree with. I had a little bit more, 50,000-foot view, if you will, because we find ourselves in a very interesting fiscal situation. You know, the relationship between our municipalities, our state, and the federal government. For people that don't know, we get $17 to $20 billion from the feds. That's almost a third of our budget. Our revenue last year was only $43 billion, and yet we spent over 60. So there's a huge gap there, and there's so much uncertainty at the federal level. The budget writers are treating everything as business as normal, and I just can't get behind it. I've asked and I've inquired about why we're doing this and why we're not taking a more conservative approach. And, you know, the budget itself raising 7%, along with the uncertainty, along with inflation, it just, our towns are getting squeezed. That increase also isn't backfilling what the towns need either. You see tons of communities in Plymouth County, across the South Shore in general, going for overrides, a lot of which are failing because people are hurting so bad. So the budget, you know, and there's particular areas that I, again, had issue with, but generally it was just, I didn't like the way that it was written out. I didn't like the way that they didn't take a serious look at either decreasing, holding level, or even planning for some of what's going to come down the pipeline on the federal level. So I didn't think it was a smart way to go forward with an increased budget.
It's interesting because it's a $6 billion jump from the current fiscal year that we're in right now. I want to say the one they passed last July, August was $57 billion, and so to add on that additional, it's definitely interesting. I would ask you, despite your voting against it, your opposition, were there things in there that you support or you saw promise in? 100%.
So even though I voted no, the budget was actually better than I expected, and I know that sounds funny, but there were two big things that I was looking for that I'd say concerned about going into the process. One was local aid. So local aid's been a big problem. I just mentioned the overrides. A lot of that's coming around funding for schools, and public safety is the other big one, but schools specifically has seen this big jump. And now we can talk about that all day long. But the biggest piece is that I truly believe the cause for some of this overrides, and it's too bad that you see it kind of play out in an adversarial nature in our town meetings, because what I say to everybody, right, is someone is showing up to a town meeting because they can't afford their tax increases. They may be elderly, they may be new to town, and they can't afford it and they don't want to leave town. The other person might be a younger couple or a younger family that have kids in the system and they want a good education for their children. Neither of those people are wrong. Neither of those people are wrong, and it's really disappointing because what the state is doing with their aid formula coming up short is making neighbors fight against each other and make the residents fight the local elected town officials. And yeah, there's always room for improvement, of course. I'm not absolving the sins of everyone budget writing down at the local level, but really it's being caused by the state. So all that to say, state funding did marginally increase. So for minimum aid districts, which some around here are minimum aid districts because of the complexities of the formulas, and that's just some technical terms. But long story short is the aid did go up a little bit for schools, which is good. So I was happy to see that. The other big thing was in the governor's version of the budget, she proposed 5 new taxes, I think. We got a lot of pushback about, I'm sure you heard, the candy tax, the prescription drug tax. We got a lot of pushback on. I was actually very happy that the budget writers in the House included 0 new taxes. So that was very, very good to not pass that along. Now, of course, if you don't include any new taxes, where is this increased revenue coming from? So I'd never really heard a good explanation from leadership on that. But, those were the 2 things that I think were overall positives, if you will.
Have you heard any feedback from constituents in regards to your vote or the budget?
Actually, only positive. Only positive. I've heard people still say, we need more local aid, which I totally agree with. If you see, we did one of the supplementals that I mentioned. So just different versions of budgets. We have the fiscal year 26, and then a supplemental is made to finish out fiscal year 25, just so that people kind of know what the words I'm using here are, because again, it's technical, and I learned it all as well at one point. But so the supplementals, I actually voted against the millionaire's tax or fair share amendment supplemental because I didn't think it went far enough in education funding. So the millionaire's tax is designated for only transportation and educational purposes. They wanted to give, it was a $1.2, $1.3 billion bill just to finish out fiscal year 25. The House gave over $800 million to the MBTA. With all these communities having overrides, I can't wrap my head around why you can't see that our schools are in dire need, dire need. And I know the MBTA has its problems, but a lot more people are using public schools than they are using the MBTA. Never mind the fact that you're really negatively affecting, your western and your rural communities as well by using, 2/3 of that money from last year on transportation. So I'm glad to see the Senate actually took a much more divided approach. So that's something that I hope they negotiate out, and I'd be happy to support, giving more money towards our public schools. So that's a little bit of the dynamic there. But to the heart of your question, yeah, I've heard people say they still need more aid for schools, which I fought for that through the supplemental as well. But most people agree that it's gone too far. It really has gone too far. The state seems to just keep spending and spending and spending. And like I said, that trickles down to our town meetings, which is obviously the most direct form of democracy on the continent, and I love our town meetings, and you get to see democracy in action there, but people get upset there, and that's where it manifests, and it's too bad because, like I was saying earlier, it really is starting at the state level there, and people so far have appreciated trying to reel it in.
So you finally went from the bullpen,
yes,
which is where all new legislators are initially put, right, once you're sworn in. Have your own office now? Yes.
So I think I was here last back in February. Now it's June, so it still took until mid to late March. They basically didn't give us offices until the day before the first committee hearing. They basically sent an email down to the bullpen, which is just a conference room. It had all 19 freshmen and our staff, so 38 people sharing these 2 conference rooms in the basement. For anyone who's been at the State House and sees the hearing rooms, not a lot of space. Yeah, so once hearings got started in mid-March, they basically said you have 2 days, get out. So all's well that ends well, so we are comfortable. For anyone who might be in Boston, we're in room 237, so please come visit. But yeah, situated, which has been good, and taking in constituent meetings and everything. So.
Okay. You've had some firsts. I think your first was you delivered your inaugural speech, and I believe this was in support of extending the MBTA Communities Act compliance deadline. What would you say the message that you were trying to get across in that moment, and why you feel this extension is so important?
Yeah, so was very appreciated that I was able to deliver that speech. It's something that's sort of mixed up in a lot of the tradition of the House. Most of the time, like, the Speaker may not be at the rostrum during during the official proceedings and things. Some other leadership is taking it, so the Speaker goes to the podium, and there's just the pomp and circumstance of it. So I appreciated being able to do that, but I felt so strongly. Most people don't give their inaugural speech so early. Out of the entire 19 freshmen, only 2 of us have spoken so far.
Wow.
Both Republicans, by the way, which is great. I think that goes to show that, the Republican caucus gets stuff done too. But the reason why I delivered on this extension, and some people actually reach out and goes, well, why did you offer, this was actually as an amendment to the budget. So I spoke during the budget process, which is a very long 4 or 5 day, usually we actually got it done in 3 days, which was like lightning fast for government.
Wow.
But through budget week, I offered an amendment to extend MBTA compliance for another year. And some people actually asked, well, why didn't you just amend it to repeal it, because we discussed I have multiple bills and things of that nature to change or repeal MBTA communities. But, I think that you got to understand your audience. Right? So for this, I was speaking to the other 159 members of the legislature who all voted for MBTA communities a few years ago. So I went for a 1-year extension because it made the most sense in the budget process, because we were writing the fiscal year 26 budget. We're getting our earmarks. We're appropriating the grant programs and everything from the executive offices for the next year. And so this made the most sense for fiscal year 26 to just say, hey, we want to push it out and make these towns eligible for these grants. And I actually told the chair of Ways and Means that this would make the single biggest financial impact to my district. Single biggest, not any earmark, not anything else you could do in the budget, not raising minimum aid, like we just talked about that we were all a big fan of. The single biggest thing that could have financially helped this district, the 6th Plymouth, and all of my towns, was if you extended this and made them grant eligible for the next year. So, it was the, how do I say this in a funny way, but it was the most bipartisan losing vote of the week. So we got the most Democrats to vote for it of any amendment that we saw throughout the entire budget process, which was good. So it was marginal. We got 5 Democrats to join on it, including the rep from Milton, who obviously has been, really tied up with the court cases and things.
Sure.
So I was really proud of that and happy to have, good, honest conversation. And some people saw the value in that. Unfortunately, with the size of our caucus, it only went so far, and the amendment was defeated. But I was happy to deliver that, and I think everybody really appreciated the angle that we were coming at it on. So.
It seems as though for you, the MBTA Communities Act is kind of the big issue that you're willing to take different approaches to tackling and making sure that your communities are being best served. I believe that this week, the administration actually has announced that some of the state property, that they're going to start looking at state property as ways for housing. Couldn't that be kind of a way to, if there are communities that are fighting against this, that if there is sufficient state space or land, that it could be kind of a compromise?
I'm always open to compromise. Absolutely. If that's something that any municipality or one of mine wants to investigate, that's great. I do think that it was a little bit more of a publicity stunt, unfortunately, with the state-owned land, because if you look at the numbers that they released, they said at most they evaluated and it could only generate 3,500 units.
That's not much.
Statewide.
Yeah.
That's nothing. And they claim that we're 200,000 short. So 3,500 isn't really going to get them over that line where they'll be like, oh, we can give up on MBTA communities now. And the big problem down here isn't, we have philosophical disagreements about MBTA communities and why, local control is important and the character of our town is unique and why density is bad. But the fact of the matter is, too, is that our infrastructure flat out cannot handle it. So even if you shift it into something that might be more amenable and say, oh, well, maybe you have all this state land and this could be a way to negotiate, that doesn't really change the fact that, we don't have sewer. We're still, septic systems down here. Our water infrastructure is aging. And we can't handle this big influx of growth that they're trying to push onto our suburban and even rural communities. So I don't think that's really going to get us over the line on what the big gripe is here about the process in practice.
Okay. Another first, you actually gave your first testimony during a hearing. Was it for one of your bills or a series of bills?
Yeah. So unfortunately, my MBTA bills, a lot of my stuff around Chapter 135, the gun bill, a lot of that stuff hasn't come up yet. But what's new this session, which so far to me has seemed really great, is there's a new 60-day time limit on bills to leave committee. So once they have a hearing, they have to move in 60 days, which before you might give your hearing in April of the first year of the session, and it might not get voted out of committee for a year. So what's really nice is now there's a 60 or a 90-day, there's a 30-day extension, but there's a 60 to 90-day window to move things. So we're really optimistic that this is going to get things moving quicker. So they've taken up a lot of local issues first, because you saw during their informal sessions way back in December when they were meeting regularly out of formal session, there was all this local stuff that they drag their feet on. So what's been good is a lot of the local bills. So when you pass things at town meeting, some of that stuff actually does need to go through the legislature actually when you approve that. If there's individuals that maybe have something wrong with their retirement eligibilities, some of that actually has to be done the way our state laws are structured, has to go through legislatively. So I've been so far testifying with a lot of local residents on local bills, working with the towns on stuff that's gone through town meeting in the last couple of years. I think only a couple of my bills that's more policy-centric I got to testify on behalf of 4-H students. I think we touched on this bill briefly previously, but just like athletes or musicians who go to competitions on behalf of their schools get excused absences, people who participate in 4-H don't get afforded the same rights. So they actually, if they, especially with the Marshfield Fairgrounds and how good 4-H is in Plymouth County, we have a lot of students that go to state or national competition and they might miss school or a test, and that's not excused. So we just made it so that it gives the school the ability to excuse up to 5 days. I was really happy to work with some local 4-H students in both Hanson and Marshfield to testify on that. We had a bill go through committee about Chapter 70, but there was a lot of bills on that as well, talking again about local aid, a bill that I had filed as well to make sure that we study how we can fix it even further. But we're going to continue to have bills go through the hearing process. I think so far I filed 26 bills, maybe 8 of them off the top of my head, 6 or 8 of them have gone through. So we still got, a good 15 to 20 bills left, and we're in there testifying on basically all of them. So.
What do you feel that you have learned so far from testifying in front of a committee as a freshman legislator?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting experience. I'd say that there's a lot of representatives up there that are really engaged and I think give a really good fair shake to local stuff. You can imagine if I'm testifying on a local bill that was voted on at Hanson Town Meeting, right, and all the reps from all over the state are listening in. They are doing their best, which I appreciate, to sort of move these things along. Testimony can only be done in 3 minutes or less, which obviously we're talking for just 30 minutes. We've done hour before and barely scratched the surface of some complex issues, like MBTA zoning is a great example. So still trying to figure out how we're going to get MBTA zoning 3-bill testimony down to 3 minutes. But it's an interesting process. I think we were just talking previously. I was just in a committee hearing that was over 5.5 hours.
Yeah.
So the hearing process.
Environment and Natural Resources Committee? Yes.
Yep. So which I'm very happy to be the ranking member on, but these committees can go quite long because they are complex issues, and we had over 100 people sign up to testify online and in person, so they can go quite long.
Do you feel as someone who is kind of, you're a fresh set of eyes as a legislator, you're sitting on these committees, do you feel that sometimes you're asking a bulk of the questions while others who are sitting on the panel are not necessarily saying much?
Yeah, whether it's a fresh set of eyes or my natural disposition, I think is anyone's guess. But yes, I really enjoy the committee hearing process, honestly. I mean, we talked last time, there's over 6,800 bills filed between the House and Senate, nearly 7,000 bills. So that takes a lot to get through. So our committees have been assigned hundreds of bills. I think my highest one has like 180, 200 bills assigned to it that we need to get through this year. And a hearing might be anywhere, if it's, controversial, if you will, or complex, there might be as few as 5 bills heard or as many as 50 bills heard in a 2-hour or a 4-hour hearing. And as I mentioned, they go long sometimes. So, I engage. Every bill deserves a fair shot, I think, and I want to give it a fair shake. If it's something that I'm like, oh, I might not agree with this, or I may agree with this, but why would someone be opposed to it? I want to make sure that, especially because the testimony is only 3 minutes, I want to make sure we get to the heart of some of the issues, right? And I've had great back and forth with people who have been testifying, whether they've been residents, professionals, anything in between. It's been really, really informative. I've learned a lot through the hearing process, but yes, I think that none of the chairs would disagree with you that I might be the question guy on the committee. So.
Any colleagues on the committee might pull you aside and go, hey, can you limit, or kind of give you any advice, or even give you a little, hey, kudos to you, that was a good question.
Yeah, no, there's definitely been a lot of that. I think that, especially, whether it's a 5.5-hour one, or even maybe a rep who's been in for
a while,
10 years plus, and I could definitely understand why the hearing process might, be a little redundant feeling for them. So, I think it is good to have those fresh eyes and make sure that we're engaging with those that are coming to speak to us.
Funny enough, you mentioned we've got a few minutes left here in our conversation. It flies, time flies. Half an hour does. You, just in the past few days, posted something in regards to more MBTA Communities Act issues, and this is the concerns about state grants being withheld or affected due to noncompliance of the MBTA Communities Act. What's the latest that you can share and give your insight on it? Yeah,
so the biggest thing I'd say is what's been so unfortunate, and what I've talked about every single time I've had the opportunity, is the goalposts move every time. That's why you have to ask me this question every time, because it's constantly different. When we spoke back in February, that was right after the fire safety equipment grants had been pulled and reinstated. Back then, due to so much backlash, I was happy that some local chiefs stepped up and spoke out about that. And now the governor has actually retreated and has said, oh, well, we're not really going to touch public safety like police and fire grants because it's too politically bad for them, which is disappointing because it's bad for our communities is the point. So what I was speaking about online recently was they reaffirmed that tourism grants would depend on MBTA compliance. Obviously, we're in Plymouth County, and we're about to celebrate our 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence and the Revolution. A lot of people want to come to Plymouth, Duxbury, all our surrounding towns for these celebrations, and these tourism grants go directly to programming for that, or to upgrade historic buildings and capital projects that have to do with tourism. And many of our communities won't get them. Won't get them because of some zoning law that's a political agenda item for the administration. And it is going to negatively affect our local economies, and it is negatively going to affect our celebration of America's independence. What could be a better microcosm for the state of Massachusetts than to say, oh, you are going to be negatively affected and can't properly celebrate when we fought against tyranny, than having the executive of our state withhold money and withhold our money. These aren't handouts. These grants come from our tax dollars, and they are not going back into our communities because we want self-determination in our zoning. And that's not right.
What are you hearing from, now, have you had any feedback from the municipalities that you serve? Have they asked you as to any legislation or any actions that you may be able to take up at the State House?
Yeah, with MBTA or generally?
Yeah, MBTA
Yeah.
and these grants.
Yeah, so we communicate very regularly. I talk to my select board chairs constantly, and you know they appreciate the bills we've already filed in relation to MBTA zoning, which would help with some of this, which we've discussed at length and are available on the legislature website as well as my social. But you know, we're still pushing through. Honestly, the best they haven't gotten their hearing. I suspect that the committee that's going to be hearing this is waiting for all the court cases to play out, which was at the heart of some of my bills anyway, to give us more time, because July 15th is the final deadline for most of my towns to become compliant, and that's when all the real punishments are going to kick in, is after July 15th, which is obviously now, from when we're taping this, only about, what, 5 weeks away.
Yep.
So very close. I'm hoping that the SJC is going to grant preliminary injunctions for the communities. As of 2 more towns just sued just yesterday, so I think that brings it up to 8 or more right now, so they're going to probably have to listen to those arguments. But I'm really hopeful. It seems from everything that I've been told, the judge is very open-minded about the arguments of the municipalities, and even called at one point the argument of the state, quote, absurd, the way they're trying to enforce this. So I'm optimistic that we're going to get a good ruling. I think that's really the next step in this fight. So the towns are really engaged because their town councils are the ones that are representing them in that fight. So I think that's going to be the next big step, and we'll kind of have to go from there.
We just got a couple moments left here. I probably want to ask you, you're probably hitting your stride. It's busy, not only up at the State House, but a lot of activities, town meetings, community ceremonies. How are you balancing your time?
Balancing time. You know, we're everywhere all at once. We really are. I'm fortunate I have great staff, so I kind of get to divide myself into a little bit, and I'm sure many of you watching this have already met him. He's great. My aide, Noah, so please reach out to either of us in the office. But what I'd say, you know, we spend a lot of time during these things, right, talking policy-heavy stuff, really partisan issues, and most of my time is really not spent doing that. You know, that's when I'm on the floor or in hearings, but most of my time I'm, you know, at a town meeting. I'm, you know, answering calls from the select board or residents. We're helping people find housing, navigate VA benefits. I've attended like already a dozen Eagle Scout presentations, and what I'd say is our district is full of incredibly impressive people. I've become even more proud of where I grew up and where I represent, and you know, people give me a hard time sometimes for being one of the younger reps up there in jest, but we have such incredible young people here. Our schools are doing a great job. You know, our residents raise some incredible people, and I'll definitely have to watch my back the next couple of years, because if any of these new Eagle Scouts or any of these recent grads giving speeches as they had the last couple weekend, our district is in very good hands for the future, and that's the most heartening thing. So through all the partisanship, I hope people get a chance to be engaged with the community, especially as we go into summer. There's such the 6th Plymouth is such a great place to be in the summer, and I hope that everybody sees the light as well, because it's a great place to live.
If folks want to reach out to your office for any of the things you talked about, help with benefits, housing, how can they do that? Yeah,
if you have any constituent issues, please reach out to our office. We do have a phone number that's listed on our website. It's just kensweezey.com. You can find plenty of information on there. There's also a contact form. You can email me directly, my aide as well. That would just be ken.sweezey@mahouse.gov. My aide is Noah Laren. Laren is Laren at mahouse.gov. We're always there for constituent problems. And if any of the policy we've talked about as well today really interests you, I really encourage you to reach out, because as these bills come up to testify, we're going to help organize. We're going to make sure that we get people up, particularly around the Chapter 135 and the MBTA Communities Act. So if you want to testify, please reach out to us. We'll keep you up to date on when those hearings are coming, and we'll be happy to host you up at the State House.
Well, as we close things out, I want to thank you for being so readily available to do media with me, and you and I have done different versions of media just to kind of get the word out as to what you're doing. And as things start to materialize, whether it's in the middle of the summer or in the fall, love to have you back on. This is your show, and this is your way to be able to provide information. So thank you so much for coming in. It's really appreciated.
No, of course. Thank you. There's in an environment where local media isn't doing well everywhere, we are very lucky in the 6th Plymouth and the South Shore to have you, WATD, Whitman Hanson Community Access, and everything in between. So thank you, Kevin, for what you do.
That's all the time we have for this show. Again, you are tuned into CrossTalk, the 6th Plymouth District edition. It's kind of a tongue twister. Until our next show, have yourself a great day.